This episode of Buy That Guitar podcast is sponsored by Oxford Guitar Supply, with everything you need to finish or refinish your guitar, including classic colors like Fire Mist Gold and Fire Mist Silver in easy-to-use spray cans. Available at www.oxfordguitarsupply.com.
Hello and welcome to Buy That Guitar, presented by Vintage Guitar Magazine. I'm your host, Ram Tuli. This podcast is about the joy of guitar. That includes buying guitars, selling guitars, collecting guitars. We're talking vintage guitars, new guitars, used guitars, pre-war, flat tops, electric Spanish arch tops, custom shop guitars, limited edition guitars, basses, amps, effect pedals, lap steels, mandolins, banjo. If it has strings, we're going to talk about it. I spent most of my life studying the vintage guitar market. It's truly something I love and I'm passionate about. I can talk guitars all day, and I'm going to. Today, I'm speaking with Davidson, owner and proprietor of Strung Guitars in Farmingdale, New York. He and I are going to discuss the most valuable guitars in today's market. You're the best person to talk to about this, David. There is nobody who knows more about these guitars than you. I think almost all of them have passed through your hands. You're the world expert on these things.
Well, you're being very kind, Bill. Thank you. And I have to tell you that it's been a really fun journey for this past, 47 years or whatever it is that I'm doing this. I've been fortunate to handle some great guitars and to take care of some great people along the way. But I couldn't do it without my partner, Paige, and without my former partner, Richie, and having some of the best people around me working with me and for me. It's a privilege. It really is.
Now, you and Richie, you guys started with Sam Ash, right?
Well, we started together with Sam Ash. Richie's parents, actually his grandparents, had a company called the Friedman Brothers Curiosity Shop in Hell's Kitchen in New York, and eventually moved the store up to 48th Street when his parents took it over, and it was called Stuyvesant Music. And Stuyvesant evolved into We Buy Guitars when Richie started to work for his parents. And when his parents had retired, his father had gotten ill, and Richie had decided at that point that keeping the whole store would be a tremendous undertaking. And Sam Ash made an offer that he couldn't refuse for the real estate, so he sold off the real estate or the lease to Sam Ash, and then kept the name, and then went to work for Sam Ash, and I went to work for Sam Ash, and Richie and I formed the vintage guitar store for Sam Ash. And then after doing that for 10 years, we decided to go back and do our thing separately. And we decided to kind of put We Buy together again, which we did on Long Island instead of in Manhattan, because post 9/11, it was kind of a rough place to be in Manhattan and have a business. So Long Island suited us. And the business had changed. I mean, it was not so much a walk in the store place as it was internet and phone sales. And so the business was changing, and we were adapting to that. And We Buy Guitars on Long Island, we had 17 years together until Richie decided to retire. And Paige was working for me out at Songbird's Guitar Museum, and she had a huge interest in guitars because she grew up with them all around her. You know, we finally decided she wanted to work for me in the store. And I said, well, I don't need you as an employee, but if you work hard, you can earn a partnership. And, you know, we started off by just giving her 10%, and she just dove in harder than I've ever seen anybody do anything. And as we were bringing the guitars back from Tennessee, I had her go through each one and photograph it and write descriptions, and she learned and asked questions and learned more. I don't hesitate for even our highest end clients to talk to her because she's super knowledgeable. And it makes my life a little easier too.
Oh, absolutely.
So that's a big help.
I remember when I first saw pictures of well-strung guitars, the inside.
Yeah.
I was just blown away. I could not believe, it was like for a guy like me, it'd be a dream come true to walk into a place that had that much color, that much variety of only the best premium stuff. And that's really what Well Strung is known for is if you want a premium guitar, you talk to David. When we talk about the most valuable guitars today, anybody who's listening to this will say, I want that. He can call you today. And you probably don't have one. You probably have a variety of things he can look at.
Sometimes we have more than one. There's no doubt. I had spent a long time as a collector accumulating guitars before I ever started selling. And then when I sold them, I sold them to a place where I was able to keep them very close to me. So if they ever were available again, I would be able to get them back. And that always gives me a steady stream as people buy something new, they trade something old, but I'm familiar with the guitar they're trading already because I sold it to them 20 years ago. So that gives us an advantage, I believe, over a lot of other people that do this for a living, is the fact that we have this built-in, basically rotation where guitars come back to us after a period of time just to be sold again. And we also buy a tremendous amount of instruments each week, which is also a little bit different than a lot of other people that are in the business. A lot of people rely on guitar shows where we basically do virtually no guitar shows. Our business is built on people sending us stuff right through the mail,
And just knowing they know what you want, what you need, what you have.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like
Yeah.
So long before I was doing the Vintage Guitar Guide, you helped me with all my books. I would always call you, and you would always give me hours of your time. And that's why today I'm just thrilled to have you on this podcast. And we want to talk about the most valuable guitars right now. This list, if it was made 100 years from now, would it be the same? Probably, yes. Vintage Guitar Magazine has done this list for their 25th anniversary. They did the 25 most valuable guitars. And then in 2017, they did the 30th for their 30th anniversary. And it was strange to see, even in that small period, how many had shifted out. And now, talking in 2024, the top ones are still there. But there's a lot of things that are moving up into that category, and a lot of things that are moving down. And that's kind of like today, we were just explain like why it matters. Like why will the Explorer, the late 1958, 59 Explorer, why that'll always be number one, the most valuable guitar in the world?
Well, there's a couple of reasons for that. First of all, it's, just sheer quantity. They didn't make many. A lot of people even, I tie the vintage guitar hobby to a lot of other similar hobbies, whether you're talking about vintage cars or vintage watches. And it seems that a lot of the biggest or the most popular cars were not popular when they were new. And a lot of most popular watches weren't popular, and they're kind of freaks and they stand out a little different. Well, the Carina guitars or the modern series of guitars for Gibson were not huge successes. And so very few were sold. And because of that, now there's a mystique that travels with these guitars. I mean, I don't know of any great record album that was made with an Explorer. I know of some good records that were made with an Explorer, yet they sound really good. I don't put them on the same level with like a Great Burst as far as sound is concerned, but they do sound really good.
Right.
And there is that crazy mystique that travels with them that if you're lucky enough to find one, you're going to have to pay a boatload of money to get one now.
Right. They're over $1 million now. Right?
Yeah, they're over $1 million. I think in the real world, they're over $1 million. I think that there's always going to be somebody that's lucky enough to get one for $700,000, and I think there's always going to be somebody unfortunate enough to pay $1.5 million. But if you're going to hold on to it for a while, you're going to come out ahead because they're always going to have that mystique. It's not going away.
And historically, since I keep track of everything, the Explorer, the late 50s Explorer, it doubles in value every 7 years. That's historically, for the last 20, 30 years, it has always at least doubled in value every 6 years. So buying one now...
That's crazy. I didn't know that.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
It's got like people who invest in stocks, they want to get at least 7% back. In the last 20 years, That Gibson Explorer has an 11% annual return. It's incredible.
That's unbelievable. And, sometimes things like they get lost on me because when you're in a business like this, sometimes you're just wondering where the next sale is going to come from. And sometimes you can't understand why you're so busy. It's a very interesting market. And a lot of times you don't take the time to see which are the guitars that are making you the most money. It's just kind of, I guess the best way to equate it is, 25 years ago, you could watch Saturday Night Live and then you knew what guitars you needed to stock the next week based on, what GE was playing.
Right. I was always so jealous of what he had. I was like, my God.
Right. You'd watch SNL and you'd say, okay, well, GE's playing a really cool Sheridan. I better get myself a cool Sheridan because somebody's going to call me next week. And, pre-internet days, that's what it was. You got on the phone with the people you knew and you'd say, hey, you got any cool Sheridans over there? I've got this to trade or whatever. And there was a lot more dealer-to-dealer trading. And the other thing that's kind of gone away is we used to have scouts. Like Richie and I had scouts in different parts of the country and sometimes outside of this country that worked for finder's fees, and they would literally dig up guitars in pawn shops and little guitar stores in the middle of nowhere, take a couple of pictures and send them to Richie and I, and we'd cut a deal and we'd give the guy some money for his time and he was happy. He'd go out and do it again.
Yep.
So a lot of the great real rarities that have surfaced over the last 25 or 30 years were because of that effort that we were doing back then.
Now, before we leave the Explorer, so we know about 49 exist right now. 5 of them have the split V headstock.
Mm-hmm.
How often do you see that split V headstock?
Yeah, well, I've only seen one. So I'll be transparent. I've only had like 4 Explorers in my whole life, okay. And none of them were split headstocks.
Okay. And if you find an Explorer that has nickel parts, what does that mean?
To me, that means the guitar was finished assembly in 1963. These were not popular selling guitars. I'm sure the story is well known. Bodies and parts sat on the shelves. And when they wound up putting things together again, they put them together kind of out of parts that were left over, So you're not going to have your PAFs and you're going to have patent numbers. You're going to have nickel parts. You're going to have the small kidney bean button tuners, which are, believe it or not, made specifically for an Explorer, which
so
people think that it's like a tuner off of a 12-string acoustic Gibson. It's not. They are specially made by Kluson for the Explorer because of the string spacing.
And then if you find one of these reassembled 1963 Explorers, they're still $500,000, right?
Sometimes more. Okay. I have one now that is, a brilliant sounding guitar and fantastic weight. And it has, everything you'd want, of a 58. It's just, like I said, cosmetically, it's slightly different, but sounds as good as any 58 I've ever had. And I got to tell you that I did have a 63 maybe 3 years ago that I sold for $750. So I've got to think that there's the gap between the 58 and the 63 is closing quickly.
Quickly, yes. So now the next most valuable guitar is, of course, the Les Pauls.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to talk about the 59, the 58, and then the 60. We're going to talk about all 3 of those together.
Sure.
Because a lot of people don't know much about these guitars. They read about stuff on the internet. They hear about stuff. They have preconceived notions. Why is the 1959 so desired over both the other years?
Wow. This is my favorite subject. So it's hocus pocus. Honestly, the internet, with all the great things it's done to us, has also enabled a lot of very knowledgeable people to be writing blogs or posts or putting a post on a forum somewhere talking about why 59s are so much better. And honestly, I don't care if it's a 58, a 59, or a 60. They're all wonderful guitars. And, the 59, you've just got the large fret, and the beginning of the larger fret, and you don't have the color, the tomato soup color of the 60 because of the aniline dye issue from 59, where the red basically seeped into the wood and went away. We all know the stories.
Right.
However, anyone buying a burst that says, well, this neck's too thin or this neck's too big, I always use this analogy. Let's say you drive a Chevrolet every day to work, and that's the car you drive. But one day your car is broken down and you've got to drive your wife's Ford. Okay. You get in that Ford and you're like, oh my goodness, everything's different about this car. It stops different. It steers different. It accelerates different. And you only notice that for about 3 minutes. And then you're just driving a car.
Right.
All right. And it's kind of the same thing with guitars. People say to me, oh, well, I don't like a Rickenbacker because it's got a really skinny neck. And I'm like, well, if you play a Rickenbacker for 5 minutes, when you go back to playing your other guitar, you're going to think that neck is fat. It's kind of the same thing with Les Pauls. When you play a blade neck or a thin neck 60, it's just your hand adapts and it takes a couple of minutes. And then once it does, then that's the guitar you're playing.
Right. In your opinion, do you think the 1960 is the best sounding out of the 3 years?
I don't know if I would say that. I would say that I've had bursts. I'm constantly surprised by different years and how good they sound. I've had amazing sounding 60s. I've had amazing sounding 58s and 59s, and I've had dogs of each. People think that every single burst was a great guitar, and that's certainly not true.
So today, if somebody wanted a burst, what would they expect to pay for one that was beautifully flamed, had the red, that was their bucket list? What would they expect now to have to pay for a 59 burst?
Yeah, I think that a 59 right now that has all the attributes that you just discussed, strong flame, strong color, really nice condition, and has all of its original components and case and everything else, is probably a $600,000 guitar on the somewhat conservative side. It's changed so much even in the past few months. It's I know of a couple of confirmed sales in the 700s.
Right.
So, it's happening. It's happening right now,
Right. Now, as far as investments, one thing I do from my own analysis is that a 59 burst will double in value about every 13 years.
Mm-hmm.
So if you compare that to the Explorer, so it's still a very good investment.
Sure.
The average investor wants to double his money every 10 years. So you're pretty close at 13 years. But you have a tangible asset which will never go down in value, and it'll be the greatest joy in your life.
Yeah, I mean, 25, I'm going to guess around 25 years ago, I was paying about $25,000 for a burst. And I would say 35 years ago, I was paying $10,000 for a burst. And now being where they're at, where even on, a plain top that has some minor issues is still, $375. It goes to show you that, the premier pieces with all the color, with all the flame and no problems will continue to bring some of the biggest dollars in vintage guitars consistently.
Yeah. So now we get to the third most valuable, which is, of course, the Flying V.
Mm-hmm.
So they made twice as many Flying Vs as Explorers. That's why it's about half. You could probably get into a Flying V today. It's about $500,000 to get into one.
Yeah, I would say anywhere from, I've seen them priced accordingly depending upon condition and stuff, anywhere from $450 to $600, with like $500 to $550 being the number for a fairly good one.
Between the Explorer and the Flying V, which one sounds better?
I like the V personally.
And most people, I think, have heard that V on a lot of records, for sure.
Oh, most definitely. I mean, forget just the Albert King stuff. I mean, a lot of people used Flying Vs and people recorded with them.
Yep.
I had not long ago sold Stephen Stills V to a guy, and it was just a wonderful guitar, and you can always tell, like the ones that were owned by pros, they just probably back in those days, they had their choice of many different ones and played several of them until they found the best one. Now, when you go to most shops, if they have a flying V at all, they have one.
Right.
Okay. One of the things about our store that, if you're looking for a flying V, you can come in here and there's 4 here or 6 because we're active buyers. And we always try to get if I can get another one, I always will. I'm not worried about ever getting stuck with a guitar like a Flying V or an Explorer or a Burst.
So now we move on to the 4th most valuable, which is the first Martin.
Mm-hmm.
So in the recent years, Martins have always been good investments. They have about the same return as a Les Paul from the 50s. But lately, these high-end flat tops have been moving up.
Mm-hmm.
And the D45, which is the pinnacle of flat tops, that'll cost you at least $500,000 probably, right, to get into a good one.
Yeah, I think about $500,000 is the number. I have 2 of them now. One is, has had a couple of, basic repairs, which that's the one thing with acoustic guitars. You have to look at them differently. Acoustic guitars, virtually all of them have had some sort of repair, right, from a neck set to, whatever it is, a bridge reglue.
And a lot of these old Martins, they'll never have the original bridge.
Correct.
And if somebody's trying to convince you that they have the original bridge, they're lying to you. There's no way.
Correct. Some people were smart enough to save the original, but it doesn't mean much. But some people care about things like that.
Yeah.
But I mean, usually, even if the bridge plate is changed, if it was done by Martin or done at least by someone quite capable,
right,
and the guitar still sounds good and the sound wasn't impeded by the work that was done, it's well worth it. The 45s are great guitars, as well as the 000 40 guitar, anything in the 40s and 000s.
Right. And one thing that's important is, like when we were talking about the Gibsons earlier, it's a supply and demand issue. Only a few hundred of these exist. And it was mainly because they just didn't sell. The 45, the D45 was just so expensive. And if you think about the Depression era, who could afford a guitar like that at that time, except somebody, a famous country western singer or a Roy Rogers type guy.
Right, right.
From what I understand, most of these really high-end Ds or the Os, they were always well preserved because the person who bought it originally just took care of it. It's not like the D18 where he's just going to play it to death. If you had a D45, you took care of it. It was put away. It was cleaned off after being used. So there are quite a few out there that are in just immaculate condition still.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, you're basically talking about the Ferrari of acoustic guitars, and who doesn't keep their Ferrari clean? Nobody's driving a dirty Ferrari. It's the same thing.
Right.
The fact that older people own them also, and this is a point that gets overlooked with a lot of guitars. So I'm going to mention this, is that, when you are a teenager, or even in your early 20s, you're a sweater. You sweat.
Right.
Okay. As you get older, you dry out. You don't sweat as much. And when you sweat when you're young, and this is the truth, and you play that guitar, at every bar gig, okay, you're going to your hand's going to wear through the finish on the back of the neck. You're going to, things are going to happen. And when you're an older person who maybe is 45 years old before they could buy their first high-end guitar and they buy a D45, well, they're dry, and they're also more responsible people.
Right. They don't lean their guitars against the amplifiers. They don't.
Right.
They don't sit them on top of things.
Yeah, and go and get a beer. Exactly.
That's why you can't find any of those sparkle top Les Paul Deluxes, because everybody who had one leaned it against the amp and it broke.
Yep. And they broke them.
Yep. So now
that's a great point.
So the Martin OM45 is the next. It's the 5th most valuable. But here's a big difference between the OM45 and the D45 is that maybe about 100 D45s are made. Maybe a dozen OM45s are made. That's why those go for a premium. They'll set you back well over
Oh yeah.
$500,000. If you can find one.
Yeah.
If you can find
I've
one.
only had one. And now knowing where the prices are, this was just a few years ago. Boy, I wish I had it back. Because the prices kind of got away from me, and that happens. That can happen in this business in a moment. You can have a guitar in your inventory and it can have several birthdays in your store. It just doesn't sell. Nobody knows why. We can't figure it out. And then all of a sudden the market takes off. I've got 5 people calling me and basically bidding on a guitar. And I'm always surprised by that because we never really see that coming. It's very, very hard.
You never know.
Very, very hard to understand what makes this market change as crazy as it does.
Well, right now, when I was doing the guide, I'm putting the guide together for next year. Flat tops, high-end flat tops are just going crazy.
Yeah.
And when I talk to people, it's really because Nashville right now, the country music scene today, they're going back to Gibson flat tops and they're going back to Martin.
Yes.
And that was kind of dormant for a little bit. We were doing different things. But now, I tell people, even the guilds and the Epiphone flat tops from the 50s they're going up in value pretty significantly because there's a resurgence of flat top type music.
Absolutely. Gibson's, I can definitely attest to Gibson's, values changing rapidly. We were always primarily an electric guitar store until right around the time of the recession. And the reason why is because acoustic guitars were holding their values, from 2008 to 2012. Flat top guitars held their values much better than electric guitars.
Right. Well, there was an over speculation with them the way there was for Stratocasters and Les Pauls.
Right. Correct.
And now we get to the 8th most valuable guitar, which is an oddball, and it's not really, there's not much you can really say about this. And these are the handmade Bigsbys, the Paul Bigsbys that were made in 1948, 49, 50. Right now, it used to be we broke out the price for different ones. Now I just put a blanket in the guide. I just say they're about $250,000 to $500,000. They never come up on the market. If they do come up on the market, one man buys them.
Yep.
And that's kind of like, so to me, it's like, there's no point. I can't find any for sale. So if you're lucky enough to find one, I know one is for sale right now and the guy wants $1 million, or close to $1 million for it. And it's just, I don't know, but that's a very unique guitar. Now, I think I asked you about this years ago. And as far as what they sound like, what they play like, and you said that it wasn't like it was overwhelmed you. It wasn't like it awed you, right?
No, not at all. They were somewhat crude and most of the time were made with terrible neck angles. And I think that, if you've got a good luthier, you can make them play well. But to me, I guess I don't understand what all the hubbub is about.
Right.
I think it's one of the first.
It's like a one of a kind, and it's
kind of a historically important instrument, but I don't know anybody who's lining up to play a gig with one.
Right. Believe it or not, I grew up in Downey, California. Well, I was a little boy. I was in Downey, California. Paul Bigsby lived 2 streets over. He lived on Philo Street. I lived on Cletus Street, which is about a couple blocks away. And we were little kids. We used to wander around. And I remember there was an old man, very grumpy old man with motorcycles in his lot. And I'm sure that was him.
Oh, wow.
I'm pretty sure that was him. He used to yell at us for walking on his walls and stuff. So,
that's amazing.
If only I'd known then, as a kid, go back and try to find something.
Sure. Yeah, that's pretty amazing.
So we get to the next, number 9. Again, the Martin D28. Now, this is a guitar that you can own. Like there's enough of these around that if you want one, you can find a perfect one because they made at least 100 before the war and then quite a few after the war. How does these compare to the D45s? Do they sound exactly the same?
No. To me, the 45, everything was premium woods. Everything they used was premium. And it does come across in the sound. The early herringbone 28s are really amazing guitars. this is another one of those internet things where, people will say, whatever it is, don't buy a Gibson made after 1965 with a thin neck, or don't buy a burst unless it's a 59. People sometimes say, well, don't buy a Martin made after 36 or 37 because of the bracing. And I'll be honest with you,
right.
I've had really great D28s into the late 50s.
Right. It's important to note that until, about 1965, when the factory expands, everything made before 65 was still very, 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 very good, whether or not it had forward, back, thick bracing.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And not much changed. I mean, once in a while, they would do things that would help the guitar's longevity. A lot of people, question why did they change the bracing?
Right.
Well, it made for a more stable instrument, and they had less repairs and comebacks. And, there are people that will always shoot down any theory. But what I can tell you is that I've had some early 40s 28s, HD 28s that would stand up with any
right.
Mid 30s herringbone. They're just as good.
And there's quite a breakdown. Like the price really breaks after the bracing changes. So if you're willing, you could get that D28 pre-war for about $100 if you're not concerned about the bracing.
Right.
And as far as investments go, these ones, they basically double in value every 8 years. So you're getting to where, you get a nice 7 to 8% annual return on it. So these are great investments, the D28s for sure.
Yes, no doubt.
Definitely.
This episode of Buy That Guitar podcast is sponsored by Oxford Guitar Supply, with everything you need to finish or refinish your guitar in vintage spec nitrocellulose lacquer. Dozens of classic colors are available, such as Lake Placid Blue and Seafoam Green. Available at www.oxfordguitarsupply.com.
Right after that, we get to the 00045s, the same thing you could just say about them. Those, again, are very, very few made.
Absolutely.
Huge. It's going to cost you quite a bit, but they're great, great guitars. Now, let's get to the 11th one. This is when we finally get to the Fender Stratocaster. And this is the very first Stratocasters that came out.
Sure.
Believe it or not, when this list was put together in 2007, it wasn't even on the top 25 as far as, most valuable. These really have come up in the last 10 years.
Right.
They basically doubled in value, it seems like, every 4 or 5 years. Bang, bang, bang. And that these are now highly desirable, and you have quite a few of them.
Well, I think one of the most amazing things about these guitars is that they were total utilitarian instruments made for the guy or girl that was, working hard playing music. And the mass production method of manufacture that Fender used, I'm sure had some shortfalls. However,
right.
It was kind of like the perfect storm. The whether you're talking about the Stratocaster or any of the other early Fender guitars, they were the perfect storm. I mean, they had the right people working there, and they had this ability to engage with the local musicians and give them guitars to play and try and give back the feedback that they were desperately looking for to improve the instrument.
Right.
So,
and every improvement turned out to lower the value over the long run.
Yeah.
It's the very first ones that he got it right. He hit a home run the first time with both the Telecaster and the Stratocaster.
Absolutely. And I think that, the testament to that is the fact that you can still go to your local music store and buy a guitar that is virtually built the same way as they were built back then.
Right.
That
has changed.
Yeah, the quality of the woods may have changed a little bit, and some things are more automated when they're made now, and there's a little less hand touch going on. But the instruments have remained virtually unchanged, where you look around at other manufacturers and you can say, how many times have they tried to improve or change the Les Paul? over the years.
Right.
It's unbelievable. There's 50 or 75 varieties of where they were constantly changing this one thing, and they continue to do that even throughout the custom shop.
They had 8 iterations through the 1950s. Whereas Fender really only, the biggest change really comes when they switch to a rosewood slab to put on the neck. Everything else just stays the same. Interesting.
Yeah, and the build quality was great from the early days on. I mean, yes, the first guitars that, have the trim cover serial numbers, most of those guitars went back for reworking in the neck pockets after they were originally salesman samples. So you'll see a lot of those guitars that had to be reworked somewhat to be made playable and sold to the public. Most of the earliest ones are so heavy. I can't imagine being a person with a guitar strap with that guitar. It's like toting around a Les Paul.
Yeah.
You were talking about 9.5 pound Stratocasters, which is insane considering 3 months later they had gotten that weight down to the mid 7 pound range. So
it was the ash, they really found better and better sources of ash.
That's what they would do. Exactly. The early guitars, you can't really call them prototypes at that point, but you could say that all the appointments on the guitar were from the prototype.
Right. So today, if somebody wants to buy that very first Stratocaster, what would you have to expect to pay?
The first couple of hundred that have the trim serial numbers, and obviously people are very hung up on the lower numbers now, and we've been fortunate. We have 0102, 0103, 0108, and a few other really early ones, and those have been around about $250,000. Ones that are slightly later might have a $10,000 or $15,000 price difference, but once the appointments start to change and they change the way the guitar was routed, and it no longer has those earlier appointments, the mid years, the May guitars, prices tail a little bit, and then by the end of 54, it's a 55 Strat. There's no difference between a late 54 and a 55. So
now we get to the next most valuable, gold top, 1957, late 57, 58, gold top Les Paul. These are significantly less than the bursts, and that's mainly because you don't have the flame, right?
Absolutely. They are incredible guitars. 57, 58 gold tops are great guitars that, in my mind, they're still undervalued at, 50 cents on the dollar or less of what a burst from 58 would be, a 58 gold top would be. So that's an incredible bargain for the person. I know that when you're talking about numbers like this, it's hard to use the word bargain, but it is such a well-priced guitar in the high-end vintage world. Figuring that you're using, basic trickle-down economics, you've got to think that gold tops are going to have their day. Some people think, well, they're over 200 now. That is their day, but I don't think so. I think there's a lot of room to grow.
They're great investments. They've always been. Yeah. They're actually better investments than the bursts. They double in value every 9.5 years.
Wow.
Now, every once in a while, you'll see a gold top that has black parts.
Yeah.
The marketplace doesn't value that as much as the white parts.
Which is absolutely silly. Yeah.
Yeah, the black ones are so rare.
Absolutely. And I personally don't understand that. I actually think they're kind of cool looking with the black parts because they're different.
Right.
But I think people have in their head that they're cooler looking with cream parts. I beg to differ. I like them with the black parts, but to each their own. I don't really understand the value difference at all. Don't understand that one.
Now, if somebody was willing to buy a gold top from early 57, when they had the P90s in them, that's quite a big difference in price on there, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, the P90 ABR1 guitars are favorites of mine. People that like P90 pickups and the sound that they can deliver, and they are absolutely great sounding guitars. I think that it's the mystique of the PAF. It's
Right.
just like people won't buy a guitar, let's say a Gibson guitar that's made in 63 or late 62 because it doesn't have PAFs. And I'm like, it's the same pickup. It's the different sticker.
Right.
The pickup's the same. Okay. And that's how biased we've become by reading articles on the internet, and some written by people who are less than qualified, that have handled less vintage guitars than most Guitar Center employees. You know, they haven't really touched them enough. They don't really understand the guitars enough and understand what their capabilities are. You know, P90 gold tops, P90 any Gibson guitars, especially their solid body guitars, are great. I don't care if you're using a Les Paul Jr.
No, tone machines.
Yeah, if you could buy a Les Paul Jr. for $11,000, it's
my 55 Les Paul is the best sounding Les Paul I've ever played.
Yeah, that's it.
So it's just insane. Yep.
I mean, some people, the earlier ones tend to have pretty large necks, and for some people that's a real comfort, and for some people that's not a comfort. They are somewhat large, and some people don't prefer them. But by 55, late 55, 56, they're rounding into what becomes the gold top neck, and they're really quite comfortable.
Okay, and then this brings us to our next Fender that shows up, the Broadcaster. One thing, when we talk about Fenders, and you told me this, there's never been a population report done.
That's true.
On Fenders. We always have a very good idea about Gibson because they kept books, very detailed books.
Yeah, we have the ledger. We have the ledger.
But we have no idea how many candy apple red Stratocasters are out. And the serial numbers don't help.
Yeah, it was a hodgepodge. They just grabbed the one out of the bin that they needed. Yeah.
Right. Leo Fender basically had an agreement with Radiotel, and they said you have to have a serial number, but they didn't tell him they had to be sequential. So when he sold stuff out the back door, there was just no way of accounting for it because these serial numbers were all over the place.
Correct.
So we really never know how many broadcasters do you think are out there?
My gut is probably about 150 that remain. Out of that, I would say there's probably less than 100 that are complete original instruments.
Mm-hmm. And how much would somebody have to pay now if you wanted a nice Broadcaster, all original?
Well, that has been a very quick moving market, but I would say a nice one now is probably $200,000.
Right. It's amazing. And then when they get the no-casters, those two are going for...
They're $1.25 for a nice one.
Exactly.
I have very strong memories of buying no-casters for $2,000 or $3,000, and even $10,000 25 years ago. So those numbers have gone up fast.
So you've played, I think you probably had more Blackguard Telecasters through your hands. What years do you think are the best sounding out of up to the White Guard era?
Wow. That's a great question. And I'll tell you why, because it's a no-win question for me. So I would say that 53 is probably the best one, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't buy a 54 or a 52 or a 51.
Well, the 53 is going to have that baseball neck.
Right. 53
really matters.
Has a neck that really, really captures people's thoughts of what that guitar should be.
It matters.
However, I've had a lot of 51s with really big necks too, and I think it really comes down to whoever made that neck that day. It is
right.
A lot of times people look at Tadeo Gomez as an artist, and he wasn't. He was an hourly worker,
right? Seasonal worker.
He shaped necks, and there was no consistent pattern. They kind of varied all over the place. So, yeah, I would say you get the most of the large neck guitars in 53 that people love, but I've had many great 52s and 51s that have necks just like that. Right.
What I found is that the bigger the neck, the lighter the ash body, the better it sounds. That's just
it's a great point. Yeah, I can't argue that.
Okay, so now we get our first Rickenbacker shows up.
Yep.
And of course, that's the 1958 model 325.
Mm-hmm.
Only 6 of these known to exist.
Yeah.
But if you could get your hands on one, it's going to cost you now well over $100,000.
Yeah, and a lot of fakes, so you got to be really careful.
That's the thing when it comes to these Rickenbackers. Very unpopular guitar at the time, and the reason it's so popular now is because John Lennon was able to get one because it was so unpopular.
Yep. Yeah, it's a difficult instrument from that short scale. It's not an easy guitar to play in my mind.
The solid tops. I think we know that there's 6 to 8 of them.
Yep.
And there's quite a few 59s with the the F holes cut in them.
Right.
But those still go for big bucks because of John Lennon.
Mm-hmm.
But it's always interesting. This year I take out of the guide the 64 360 12. I've always had that in there, and that's always been just a price. There's one exists that we know of. And so I finally took it out, and that's another one that if you could ever find a real one, it'd be worth a fortune because there's only 1 or 2 of them. A lot of fakes. We always tell people there are a lot of fakes out there because they made those horned bodies for 360s, but
sure,
that's just a Rickenbacker. You have to be a Rickenbacker lover to really like that guitar, but it's amazing for its historical.
Well, here's my thing on those, and it's there. You could say this about a lot of guitars, but when you look at like a 360 12 string, if you're a gigging guitar player and you are going in and maybe you get a shot at a studio making a recording, and the producer says, "Hey, I need something like Rickenbacker and jangly sounding." There's no other guitar you can use, and you better be darn sure that you have one in your toolbox, or you're not getting that gig, and you're probably not getting called back for any other ones. I can say that about a lot of different guitars, but a Rickenbacker 12-string sounds different than any other 12-string ever made. It's not the best 12-string ever made, in my opinion, but it has such a unique sound.
And anybody who's had a restring one will tell you that.
Yeah, it's a unique sound, and no other 12-string sounds like it. And because of that, I think that there'll always be a market for that guitar, for whether you're looking to do a Byrds deal or a Beatles gig, or if you're playing some original music that needs an electric 12, like that's the guitar you want to use.
Right. Okay, then we move down the list a little bit. Well,
sure.
Of course, the 335 naturals, we got 200 or so made. The 335 market's kind of plateaued, but people, if they want to get a 335 dot neck and you can get a natural, a blonde, that's something. That's something people really, really, really want.
That's a grand slam guitar.
And they'll put you back. That's
like all of a sudden they just got not only hot, but they are like pro guys really want to own one now.
Right. Just they're beautiful guitars.
There was a period of time where pro guys didn't care if it was sunburst or blue or orange or pink.
Right.
Now it's like, I really want a blonde one. And it's got to be a thin top, and it's got to, all these different things that they're looking for, which makes it even harder.
Right.
To locate things.
And Gibson stopped making them because when the cherries came out, everybody wanted a cherry. Who wants a boring blonde?
Mm-hmm.
You want the cherry.
Yeah.
And to me, the cherries are always the most beautiful anyway, too. So.
I mean, after 60, it's all by special order if you want a blonde guitar anyway,
Right.
So there's very few around. The thing that amazes me about the thin line project that Gibson had is that there were so many things that could have been ordered that people looked right past the price sheet. They didn't even know. Music stores weren't even aware. And the fact that they built so many custom instruments in thin lines, they did so many custom one-offs for people, that there's so many interesting guitars out there. And that's one of the things we look for. We look for guitars that you can't buy anywhere else, you know?
One thing that people don't understand is why is a 1959 ES 335 more expensive than a 1958 ES 335?
Mostly because by 59, they had corrected the neck angle problem. The early guitars have such a shallow neck angle that there's really no room to adjust the bridge if you need to bring the action down. So it can create a whole bunch of problems if you're the person that owns it. So there are certain things you should look for when you're buying.
Did the frets change also? Did the frets change in 59?
The frets change, of course.
And I believe they thickened it, right? They went from a 2-ply to a 3-ply.
That is correct. The top changes.
So if it's a 335 dot neck you're after, you want to get like a 59, 60.
Yeah, you want to get a 59, and some people say the thin tops sound a little better. Honestly, to me, they are every bit as good as a burst as far as how they sound. So, a lot of people call them burst killer. I don't know if they're burst killers, but they're a great guitar to live right next door to your burst, put it to you that way.
Now, the next most valuable is one that you and I talked about 2 weeks ago, and you told me that the EDS 17 or 1275 thin bodies, the ones that came out special order, are now big bucks.
You're talking about the hollow.
Yes, the double neck 12.
Yeah, the hollow body guitars, especially the 612s. Now, they made many varieties of this. They made the EDS 1275. They had the EMS series, which the 1235 is the most popular, but there's many other varieties. They could do anything from a 6-string and a bass neck to a 6-string bass neck and a mandolin neck. And they did these crazy things. A lot of country players use them, believe it or not. Because they like that double neck, having that availability of having the double neck right there. And bluesgrass players use them. I have one with a tenor and a mandolin, and one tenor neck, one mandolin neck. So, but the 1275, which is, or the double 12 that they called it, which is the 6-string, 12-string, are really the most popular ones. And they have gone, just crazy. It
used to be you could get a late 60s for, pretty good money. No, now you got to pay quite a bit even to get one that's late 60s, with the New Orleans stuff going on.
Yeah, I think that, when you get into the solid body of that instrument, which is 1964 and later, I suppose, or 63 and later, it's a very different guitar, and I think most people look to one person for the popularity of that instrument, and that's Jimmy Page. So people will buy one because, hey, I want to have that sound. Right. Needless to say, Jimmy Page actually recorded Stairway to Heaven with a Fender Electric 12, right. but he performed live with a double neck because obviously it was more convenient to not have that change.
Out of all the guitars that I've talked about, that has the greatest return. That thing, that will double in value almost every 5 years.
Yeah.
So one of those, you wish you bought it 20 years ago, for sure.
Oh, yeah. I mean, when I started to buy them, when I was buying the guitars that later became the museum collection, I had bought about 40 different double necks, and some of them were just unbelievable. And, I sold many of them. I still have some left, but they're getting hard to source. Right. I can't replace what I've sold very easily anymore.
So, and let's finish this list out with the next one, which is the White Penguin. Another one is supply and demand. They made 50 to 100 of these. We don't even really know how many they made. The White Penguin, though, is that a hard one to move? Is there a market for that?
Well, here's the interesting thing. I've been lucky enough to have a few in my life, and a couple of them I've sold a couple of times, because what happens is people have them for years, and then the value's gone up and they see the opportunity to trade towards something that they want. But I have to say that the White Penguin pricing has hung right around that same level for so long. They pretty much sell about the same now as they did 10 years ago, which is kind of crazy. But,
right.
The thing is they haven't really gone up, but some dealers, when they get them, don't know what to do with them, and they just sell them to the first offer that comes in, which, you don't need to do. People do buy them.
The White Penguin, it even is kind of stagnant. The White Falcon lately has been moving, especially the gold foil 55s. Those are starting to move again.
Well, they're great guitars.
Yeah.
I mean, and I think that, it's all about construction. If the guitar is held together through all these years, it'll probably hold together for another 50, they either disintegrate, as far as the binding and everything just starts to fall off the guitars. And that starts happening sometimes in the first 10 or 15 years. If it survives that, chances are they're pretty stable now. But if you see anything, if you see any oxidation or off-gassing on the binding, you need to know how to treat it and care for it right away.
Right.
And those guitars are wonderful sounding instruments, and they reside on a lot of records. A lot of people recorded with those guitars. They sound wonderful.
Yes. So we've talked about top 20 most valuable guitars. Is there anything that I'm missing that we should bring up that you think is something that's just moving quickly, popping over the $100,000 mark?
I mean, the thing is that, we definitely talked and we definitely touched on a lot of different guitars. I would say that the one thing that is still one of the best guitars, if you can get your hands on it, is any kind of, earlier custom color Fender guitar.
Right.
To me, we lose sight of the fact that they may have made a candy apple red Stratocaster for every 75 sunbursts that they made. Okay. And they may have made 75 candy apple reds before they made a Fiesta red or a Sonic blue. And if you use that formula down to their toughest colors and their most difficult colors, sometimes you're looking at one of just a handful of guitars that were made in a particular color. And if you have an opportunity to get a guitar like that, they're going to be great money movers for you in the future.
And these are mainly these are the pastel colors, right? That would just be.
Yeah, the pastels and some of the metallics, like Burgundy Mist is a great color, but like the Daphnes and the foam greens and the surf green, which in a Stratocaster, I don't know. I haven't never seen a real one. Mm-hmm. If you could find a shell pink one, then you've got basically the Holy Grail.
Right.
If it's a slab board, which it would be, a slab board shell pink guitar, that's an honest guitar. I think that's one of the rarest guitars that's out there.
Right. It's also important to point out that Telecasters, custom color Telecasters, are extremely rare. Because you think about it, that was a utilitarian guitar.
Yeah, and even the Esquire makes it even more silly.
Right. So if you could get a Fiesta Red Esquire, that's a very rare guitar, very expensive guitar now.
Yeah, you're talking about the bottom of the price catalog for Fender at the time. The Mustang wasn't out yet.
Right.
This was the bottom priced guitar, and to add another 5% to put a color into it, a lot of times didn't make sense. So not many were ordered with colors.
So perfect. So, David, thank you so much. You gave me a whole hour of your time, and I appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you. It was really, really great to talk with you.
If everything we talked about, we basically just talked about the top 20 most valuable guitars. If you have an inkling, you want one of these, you call David. He has it sitting on his shelf for you.
Thank you.
I can't wait to come out and see you. I'm going to do it because we've already talked about what I'm going to try to buy.
Oh, yeah. No, I'm going to make you buy me lunch or something.
Yeah. But I thank you so much for your time, and I appreciate everything.
Same here.
Next week, I'm going to talk about what I call sleepers, guitars you can get that are vintage guitars, but they're $2,000, and they have the same return as a Les Paul Jr.
No doubt.
So that's what I'll be talking about today. I wanted to start off just talking about the cream of the crop. When it comes to premier guitars, you got to go to Strung. That's really, when we talk about premium vintage, everything you have on your wall is premium vintage. It's just, you blow your mind.
Well, you're too kind. Thank you so much. And it was really great to talk to you, and I look forward to the next time.
Okay. Thank you again.
All right. Be well. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to Buy That Guitar, presented by Vintage Guitar Magazine. Please support Vintage Guitar Magazine for all they do for guitar players like me and you. Please subscribe, like, share, and comment on this podcast. I'd love to hear from you. See you again real soon.
This episode of Buy That Guitar podcast is sponsored by Oxford Guitar Supply, with everything you need to finish or refinish your guitar in vintage spec nitrous cellulose lacquer. Dozens of classic colors are available, such as ocean turquoise and burgundy mist. Available at www.oxfordguitarsupply.com.